Hello, people. Welcome back to the Trickway. Mr. Gray here doing his thing. How the hell are we doing, Gray? Are we good?
We're doing good. We're doing good.
Good. Right. Okay. Today we're doing what we like to call a special. Just a one-off. It's not a review. It's just we have an idea. We like to expand it and talk upon it. And our good friend from Gray's Green Room, Mr. Mystic Dude, gave us a question recently. And the basic premise behind it is remakes in Star Trek, ideas remade, plot lines remade, taking something that was from before and then trying to remake it to something different or exactly the same. And there's a few examples of this in Star Trek. And what Mystic says here is...
Well, what? Just so we're straight, it's Mystic Dude's friend Tony.
It is. Sorry, you're right. Yes.
Yep. That submitted this question. We liked it, so we figured we could really expand on it.
Yeah, Mr. Tony. Actually, I'm giving Mystic all the credit here. It's actually Tony. Have we met Tony? I don't think we have. Have we?
No.
Okay. So Tony, friend of Mystic Dude, actually asked us previously, why is Star Trek Strange New Worlds episode Quality of Mercy? That's the one, the end of season 1.
Episode 9.
9, not 10. The end, the penultimate episode. Why was it so good for remaking Star Trek original series Balance of Terror, which I have seen again since. Yet Star Trek Into Darkness... Sorry. So good for remaking Star Trek the original series Balance of Terror episode, yet Star Trek Into Darkness so bad for remaking the Star Trek Wrath of Khan film. Now, it is a good point, and that's why we're talking about it, Gray, because there are a few examples of this that we know of in Star Trek, and Tony's actually put probably both of them right there immediately. He goes on to say that, now I've seen this movie, Gray hasn't, in his defence, Star Trek Into Darkness, the Kelvinverse movie. These movies on their own were good movies if you take them away from previous plots and canon and stuff. So. Opinions.
The only timeline movie of Kelvin that I actually liked was the very first.
You haven't seen this. You haven't seen Into Darkness, though.
I didn't need to see it. I saw clips of it and stuff, and my other buddy, who's as big a Star Trek fan as me, he almost threw up when he saw the second movie. And of course, the third one he hated as well. But everything I've seen on it, every clip I've seen on it, and I've seen a lot of them. And I'm not the only one. There's a lot of fans out there that aren't overly thrilled with the Kelvin timeline at all. Some of us wish it would just kind of go away. And I don't think they really handled the whole Kelvin timeline properly, to be honest with you, with the exception possibly of the first movie.
If you haven't seen it, man, I'm sorry. If you haven't seen it, it's very, very hard to base an opinion on something unless you've seen it. I think you're letting your bias of the whole Kelvin universe thing tar this all, in which I don't blame you. I'm actually coming at your defense here. I don't blame you for that because I'm not a fan of the Kelvin universe. Because I'm trying to be impartial, be the impartial host that's sitting on the fence.
Impartial? Since when are we impartial?
No, I'm impartial. I have to try and rein you in sometimes, Gray. No, they aren't great movies in the whole Star Trek sphere, the whole Star Trek world. They're not. All I'm saying is, if you take them away from canon, if they weren't Star Trek movies and they were completely separated as standalone movies, a bit like Discovery or something in the first 2 seasons, might have been enjoyable. But because they were Star Trek Into Darkness, Star Trek whatever, it pissed us off because they do what they always do, Gray. They ruin canon. They just take the piss out of Star Trek fans in general, and we're not appreciative of that, are we? That movie, Into Darkness, if they'd taken it away from Star Trek, I'm looking outside the Star Trek sphere now, Gray, it could have been enjoyable because it had the pew-pew, it had the storyline, the plot, it had the actors in it. But the problem is, I felt a little bit sorry for the actors in this because they were on a hiding to nothing because they knew a lot of fans would just be like, nah, not doing it. They even tried to bring Leonard Nimoy into it, try and bring in some classic people, and that didn't do much for it. But if we backtrack slightly, Gray, so you like I have seen the episode A Quality of Mercy, the promoter episode of Strange New Worlds, and you have seen Balance of Terror, which it's based on from the original series. Now, I've been working my way slowly through original series episodes again because it's been a long time. But
Aren't they
Balance of
great?
well, no, no complaints so far. A Balance of Terror is an episode I watched before I watched the rest because Gray said, watch it. It's really, really good. Now, what I want to ask you, Gray, is your opinion of A Quality of Mercy on its own, Balance of Terror on its own, and then comparing the two. Did they do a good job as opposed to the Star Trek Into Darkness, where they basically done the Wrath of Khan plot and they didn't do a very good job of it?
Well, I mean, the original Balance of Terror episode was probably one of my top 3, 4 episodes ever of the original series. It was really good, which in itself was, I'm gonna kind of lightly say, a remake of World War II movies because it came right out of the movies where the submarine was underwater and the ship above is dropping depth charges and they're trying to figure out where the enemy is, etc. It's an old trope that was used in war movies for years,
Yeah.
and they brought the trope into Star Trek, but they handled it really well. So it was really good, and it did a lot of things because at that time the Romulans were mysterious. We didn't know who they were, what they looked like, and they were attacking outposts and the whole 9 yards. And then, of course, putting the twist in during the episode of the Romulans looking like Vulcans, which automatically made, well, one of the actors in the series of that episode was looking at Spock and, basically accusing him of being the enemy, which
Yeah.
it also is something taken from history because they did a lot of that in World War II movies when it came to Japanese Americans. So,
Mm.
um, so they moved all these things that happened for real in history and involved them into the story, which
Yeah.
I thought was great. And so the whole episode was really, really well done. Um, Quality of Mercy, like, was a really good episode, and I can't put it as good as Balance of Terror because why Balance of Terror came first,
Yeah.
right? But
Reasonable.
what I did like was that they actually, I was afraid at first because I was going, when I started watching it, I'm saying like, oh, don't ruin Balance of Terror, no, please. But I was actually happy the way they did handle it.
Mm.
Um, I thought they handled it quite well. Could they have handled it a little bit better? Maybe. Um, but they did handle it pretty good. So in other words, what happened in this episode, Balance of Terror, basically had to happen the way it happened, and because Pike wanted to change things in order to avoid his ultimate death and the death of some of the cadets, or not the death, but to save these other cadets.
Mm-hmm.
He figured that if he does things differently, he can save himself, he can save the cadets, that do end up perishing
Win-win.
or whatever, in what he saw in his future. But in so doing that, he messed up a timeline, and so his older self comes through just dressed in the Wrath of Khan outfits,
Yeah.
by the way.
Which I loved.
Um, right, and he comes back and says, "Look, he messed it up." And through the use of the Klingon time crystal, I think it
Yep.
was.
Yep.
And I'll get back to the time crystal because I have a little issue with that. But
So
anyway,
did I. A big one.
um, yeah. And so forgetting that for the moment, he came back and said, "You need to you know, things you messed up, so you really got to come back and straighten this thing out." So when he went back and did the episode again, this time it was the Enterprise with Pike because Pike didn't die. He still remained on the Enterprise and stayed on it for longer than he would have. And Kirk then, of course, did not take over the Enterprise, which then made Pike and crew encounter the Romulans for the first time.
And Kirk was on the Farragut. Yeah.
And Kirk was on the Farragut, correct?
Yeah.
So we got to see Kirk for the first time, which was kind of cool, even though it was an alternate timeline.
He was
Kirk.
captain.
He was captain, but it was a different ship.
Yep.
He did help in it. But the thing that was really cool is they took certain scenes from Balance of Terror and redid them almost word for word, which I thought was great because they wanted to show that essentially it was the same thing as much as possible anyway. So they actually took pieces right out of it and just reacted them in Strange New Worlds, which is really cool. even down to the one where they saw the Romulan for the first time, and they look at Spock, and you see the ears.
Plagiarism, Gray.
And what I thought was really cool too, as an homage, besides the whole show being an homage to the original series, they also use some of the music, which I really like too. So they use some of the music that they used, maybe just slightly changed
Yeah,
from the Balance of Terror in this episode, and I just thought, oh, that's great, So it really did. It was nice because I thought it was nostalgic. It was a good tip of the hat to the original series. And
it was.
basically, it's no surprise right now if you haven't seen the episode, you can hold your ears. But basically, everything got straightened out, and Pike came to terms with what was going to happen to him eventually, and he's cool with it now,
Yeah.
and everything's right in the world again. But it was a gutsy move to do it because if they could have screwed that up big time
Oh yeah.
and made a lot of us pretty angry. Now, to come back to the time crystal, I want you to tell me what your problem was with that before I say anything.
I'll come to that in a moment. I just want to give my quick opinion on
Yeah,
that
yeah,
episode versus the two, and then we'll tackle
sure.
the crystal together. I agree with you, Gray. I saw the in the reverse order. Although I probably saw Balance of Terror when I was young on a repeat and then forgot about it because
Mhm.
I have the memory of a goldfish. But that episode was fantastic. That should have been the series finale because the series finale was
Yeah,
nowhere near as
yeah,
strong as that. I didn't get it. They were back to
yeah.
front, but they had the reasons for it. So watching
Mhm.
this, I loved. They handled it perfectly. Like Gray said, if you are going to do, if you're going to remake an idea, a movie, a character, anything that's been done before, and I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying do a good job. Have some
Yeah.
bloody good writers. Do not make an arse of it. Do I expect it to be perfect? No, I don't expect anything to be perfect, but I want it to be good. And there've been little things we nitpick, like the crystal, for example. Balance of Terror, when I watched that after, I'm glad I watched in that order, actually, Gray. I'm glad because I was able to compare it from a different lens than, say, yourself. Because I watched that and I didn't remember a Balance of Terror first time, so I got to watch it afresh and without anything weighing on my opinion or pulling on my opinion. Thoroughly enjoyed both episodes. I thought they handled it well. There is a couple of nitpicks we'll come to, the first one being the crystal. Now, that bloody crystal. So they kind of have to use that because Discovery in the first season, second season, I can't remember which one it was. They
Yeah, I
used that.
remember.
They used that crystal and it's therefore canon, and that's the first two seasons which they made an arse of things,
Mhm.
and it's other seasons of Discovery or other series of Star Trek trying to fix the mistakes of Discovery season 1 and 2. So they have to take some things, sometimes unfortunately Grey, to
Mhm.
try and repair it and move on. Because we knew that Pike was going to die in that way, it couldn't be undone, or it maybe could in the
Right.
future via sci-fi. But they had to use it. I rather they didn't use it, but their hands were kind of tied. If they hadn't used it
Yeah.
at all in season 1 or 2, we wouldn't be in this situation. Um, but then again,
And
if they
they couldn't end up using things like the Guardian of Forever because they didn't know what that was. That was Kirk, and that came later.
yeah,
So
some
they
things
were
are good, some
stuck.
things are bad with it. They
Yeah.
are, and I'm glad they done the Guardian Forever. That's another example we can talk about.
Mhm.
So I wasn't a fan of them using it, Gray. I wasn't a fan, but I felt their hands were tied, and without it, we wouldn't have had that quality episode. What's your thoughts on the Crystal?
I think that they, like you said, they had to use it. Was I happy they used it? Well, yes and no. Yes, for the fact that they had to make the episode at all, right? You had
Yeah.
to come up with something. I did feel that the crystal was a bit of a crutch, and that it was
Yes.
like it was a little too easy, kind of like wow, the crystal, and boom, there we go, and like
And where did
any
the
explanation
Klingons
for
get
this?
this bloody crystal from? That's never
I
been in older Star Trek. What?
they
They've got
yeah,
time
it
crystals?
it never was supposedly on this. I don't forget whether it was Klingon Prime or the Moon. I think it was the Moon. Anyway, or one of their moons. But anyway, they were mining like people mine. That's fine. They mine for ores or gems or metals or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's okay. And to discover a metal that or a gem or something that does interesting properties is kind of cool too. But when you're talking about finding a crystal that if you come in contact with it gives you premonitions,
That's
or blinks to the
it's
future, or
stretching
blinks to the
sci-fi.
past.
It's stretching it.
Yeah, that's I mean, I can accept it fine, but it's I don't know, man. That's a
And
little bit
remember
too.
Janeway? Remember Janeway in Endgame? She goes to the Klingons as well, and it's not a crystal, but it's a temporal device. So what is it with bloody Klingons and time traveling
Yeah,
things?
no,
You know?
I mean, let's step back for a second because you brought up a good point when we're talking about temporal anomalies and all this crap that for time travel. Um, yes, there's been episodes where they involve time travel and they were good.
hmm
Other sci-fi series have done time travel stuff and they were either good or really bad.
Like
Um, what?
Picard
You
season
tell me.
two.
Oh, okay.
That's a bad
Oh God,
example of it. Yeah, that's
yeah,
a
that's
bad
a
example of it.
horrible
Yeah.
example. But the thing that I don't like in any sci-fi series, whether it be Star Trek or not, is to constantly keep revisiting this time travel thing. I mean,
Yeah.
really, time travel stories ought to be very sparingly. In other words, you don't do many of them at all.
And when you
And
do them well.
if exactly, if you are going to do them, there should be like a written law somewhere in the writer's Bible that says if you're going to do time travel, it better be a
Was it not in Gene's
damn good
Bible?
episode.
I'm sure it must have been in
Well,
Gene's Bible.
it
It should
might
have
have, but
been.
the point it should be there for every science fiction writer. If you're going to do a time travel story, it's
Create
got
the
to
rules
be
first. That's a good
freaking
point.
good. And if it not only has to be freaking good, but it has to at least have something that's not going to make you go like, "Oh, that's too easy." Because as soon as you go like, "Oh, that's too easy," then it's just yeah.
And instead, we should be saying it's smart and wow, I didn't see that coming.
Right, exactly. So the time crystal was more of a
A
yeah, it's
necessity.
kind of like borderline that's too easy vehicle.
Yeah.
Now, they took it from there though, and then they made something that was good. So it could have been worse. They could have made a terrible episode off of a crutch. This way they had a crutch, but at least they made a good episode out of it. So that's fine.
Yeah.
But and let me for 1 second, even though I know you don't watch the series that much, but for Babylon 5 fans out there, that's my second most favorite sci-fi series of all after Trek. And it was interesting because the guy that wrote 95% of all the episodes, who was the creator, and he actually holds a world record for that, by the way.
Wow.
Um, he even said that the same thing. He said, if you're gonna write a time travel story, it's got to be good. And he said that he wrote one and only one in the entire 5 seasons, and would never write another one.
Good.
And the way he did it, the one that he did was perfect. Don't need anything else. Now, that's the good thing about it. And not a lot of sci-fi series can say that because they'll end up doing one. Oh, that was great. Let's do another one. Oh, that was great. Let's do another one. Oh, that was great. Let's do another one.
hmm
No, stop. so I was really happy that the guy decided, he knew that they were overused. And he said, I do one. It makes sense for for the 5-year story arc. Never do another one.
Yeah.
Don't and so in my perfect world, I wish all sci-fi series would do that. If you're gonna do one and only one, and make it really good.
Yeah. Sparingly.
Now, right. And in Star Trek history, the only time you really got a time, well, you got it more than once, but the one that really did it well, of course, was with the Guardian of the Universe, and when
Star
they did the
Trek
whole time.
4. I like that as well.
Yeah,
No?
but the Enterprise did it originally, and that's still held up as being one of the best
Yeah,
episodes
yeah,
ever.
yeah, yeah.
It was done really, really well, and the character, the creature, or this machine, the Guardian, was pretty neat. The only thing I didn't like about later in Trek fandom was that they started going back to the Guardian in some of the books. Now, I didn't read the books, but the point is that I know they did it a couple of times, and I'm kind
Yeah.
of like, man, come on. If it was going to be that easy, then any one of us could go fly where the Guardian
Well,
is and say, I'll just jump through it and screw up time.
should we use that then?
Yeah.
Should we talk about the Guardian forever? I have 3 examples here. We talked about 2 of them at the start, but that's a nice third one, Gray, that I think is worth
Hmm.
talking about because I think they've done a good job. So, season 2 of Discovery, we get the Guardian of Forever episode. Now, again, because my original series memory is nowhere near as good as Gray, I'd forgotten about this. I'd read about it, so I knew it was coming, but I forgot about it, and I didn't know when it happened in the episode. So when this came about, this guy, this older guy, just reading the newspaper on a chair on a planet, just random, and there's a door, and there's this whole thing about should Giorgio go through, can she go through, and then he reveals himself as the Guardian of Forever. Now, I'm kind of glad sometimes that I forget these things, because I almost come across it as with the kind of the excitement of someone that's never seen it before, different kind of lens. So he announces himself as the Guardian Forever, and the voice comes on, I am the Guardian Forever, and it's not the old man voice, it's the very Hollywood operatic kind of voice. And then the door kind of smashes into bits and then reforms as the portal. But the portal is obviously looks similar to the original, but it's been obviously updated and revamped. I have no issues with that. And then he's talking about why he's where he is, and they explain where he's been all this time. And he's saying, you know, people were trying to use and abuse me, basically. I hid myself. I took myself away to this planet. And that, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, that's where they're drawing from beta canon by going from the books. I thought they'd done a cracking job of explaining where the hell he's been, why he doesn't help anyone anymore, and how they wrapped up the Giorgio thing. That's maybe one example, two examples where it's done well.
For people that don't know, City on the Edge of Forever was the episode in the original series.
Yeah.
And the character or machine was Guardian of Forever. That's where it started.
Yeah.
But I never saw that episode that you're talking about, so I can't really say anything.
It's on season 2 of Discovery. What you've seen, have you not? You're not up to date with that?
Yeah, I did see season 2, but I don't remember the Guardian. You sure it was 2?
Yes, it was. Yeah, because this was not long before the time travel thing at the end. So go back and watch that, Gray, because it is really enjoyable, that section. You know,
I mean, if that's how they described it, that he took himself out of action, so to speak. And I guess that's good, because he really shouldn't be as easy to use.
They send Giorgio back to current Trek timelines, because that's where she's supposed to be, rather than in the future, and then the ship goes on without her. So
some of the books that I did read, this goes back years ago, they said something to the effect that the planet that had the Guardian on it was very well guarded by the Federation. And there was some kind of treaty that they had with other races, even if they weren't really at talking nice to these other races.
Yeah.
And apparently across the board, all the races agreed that they would all never go there, because they know that it was almost like mutual assured destruction. If they go there, it could mean they're gone, or everybody.
Where have we seen that? Where have we seen that before?
Exactly. But that did make sense, because if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because you don't know, if you go through it, you change one little thing, you can wipe out your entire race, or maybe they don't exist at all, or whatever.
That's what I liked about the remake version of that episode of that. Not an episode, it was that theme, that idea. The episode wasn't remade, it was just that section was taken out and done in this episode of Discovery. And the fact is, first time around, you the original episode, you see the portal and it talks and stuff to you. It's like sentient, obviously, maybe AI, you don't know. But in the revamped episode in Discovery, what you see, Gray, is the portal's there, but it's disguised itself first and foremost as a door. I love that. And then the AI or the sentience is, I don't think it's AI, I think it's more sentience, is actually a guy separate from the portal. I like that. I like that modernization, that revamp of it. So that is another example, I think, Gray, of a remake actually being done well. We have 3 examples like we're going to talk about. We talked about one, Quality of Mercy versus Balance of Terror. We think they've done a good job of it. We've just talked about the Guardian of Forever. I think, and Gray can't remember this, so I'll speak on his behalf, I think they've done a good job of that. So that's 2+ points. When we came on at the start of this, Gray, I think we're going to be like, stop doing these remakes, you're ruining it. But 2-0 up for the positive. But we have to talk about the one downside, Gray, and I think it's a big one. You haven't seen this. I have. It's the Star Trek Into Darkness Kelvinverse movie. Like, again, sorry to repeat myself, if it been on its own away from Star Trek, sitting by itself in a parallel universe, you would have went, it's good. But it's not. It's Star Trek. It's canon. We cannot get disappointed with it. I hated the fact that we're going to do this, Gray. We heard rumours beforehand that Benedict Cumberbatch, who's a great actor on his own, absolutely brilliant. yeah, I've watched him in Sherlock Holmes and other things. He is brilliant at what he does. So I don't blame him or any of the actors for this. I blame the writers and the showrunners for these things. But it wasn't good. We knew he was going to be Kahn. It wasn't a secret. He revealed himself as Kahn. The way he revealed himself wasn't great. I didn't see the necessity or the reason for it. Of what you've seen of this, I know you haven't seen the movie, Gray, but you've read reviews, you spoke to your friends, you've seen clips and trailers and whatnot. What was your brief impression of it? What did you think they may have done right or wrong?
My impression and my friend's impression, he's a pretty big fan too, and he saw it. He said that he thought revealing the character as being Khan was totally out of left field and made absolutely no sense. It's almost kind of like, let's just throw that in there just to wow people, and it was like that was the only reason that they did it. And
Yeah,
that's how it came off. And if that's the case, man, then that's pretty stupid.
yeah,
Not to mention that you Wrath of Khan is the Star Trek movie world, not the original series. So you're already remaking a movie in another movie. You didn't really need to do that, you know. And from what I understand, and you saw the movie, it didn't really further the movie in any way. It didn't further the storyline really.
no, no.
So what was the use? The only use would have been sensationalism. That's it.
They were just trying to rehash great ideas because they've no Hollywood, as we know, has run out of original ideas. So they copy
Mhm.
books now. They do movies and books and plays and whatnot because they've run out of ideas. So we see the odd gem out there that comes about. We're astonished normally. So no surprise they've done this here. If they had left the revelation that John Harrison was the name of the character. If they'd left that out as him being Khan, it may have been actually a lot better. Because on its own, like I say,
Mhm.
it was this guy that was a lot stronger. Yes, he could have been engineered. Yes, he was running amok and pulling a fast one on the Enterprise, on Kirk, on the Federation. It would have been great, but they didn't. They had to use the can thing, which was a cheap maneuver. It's like the time travel thing. If you're going to do it well. And one
Yeah.
of the best, if not the best storyline, I think, in certainly in the movie history of Star Trek, is the Wrath of Khan. When I saw it recently at its
Mhm.
anniversary at the cinema, told Gray about this. Absolutely loved it. I didn't see it when it came out a year before I was born, so I never
I
saw it at
did.
the cinema. He did. Gives you a clue, roughly. Um, Gray thoroughly enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The cinema was packed. Everyone was clapping at the end, which I don't normally do. I find very cheesy. But I done it this time because I loved it. And then we done the
Yeah.
whole can moment. It was just special. It is pop culture at its best. And they go and ruin this. And
Yeah.
it really pissed me off, Gray, because it could have been a decent movie on its own. I try to not look at the Kelvin. I don't like the Kelvin universe. I don't,
Mhm.
because of what it
Yeah.
stands for, what it means, why they done that. Um,
And of course we have the rumors now of Star Trek 4
oh,
Kelvin
we've heard that
timeline.
for ages, man. That's.
I know. I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but I keep on hearing it's gonna happen. No, yes, no, yes, no, yes. It's kind of like, come
I
on.
would much rather see Strange New Worlds cast in
Yeah,
movies. They done
yeah.
it
If
with
that
the
was the
next
case.
gen, so why can't they do it with their most popular Star Trek
Yeah, but
series at the
let's not
moment?
rush it because I want a whole bunch of good episodes and seasons
Oh
before we
hell
get
yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I no doubt then they're going to make more Kelvin verse movies. Um, if I try and detach myself from that, Grey, which I
Hmm.
can do better than you, safe to say, and I'm not blaming you for that. You know, you've got a lot more Star Trek wisdom on me, you know, which is fair enough. But if I just try and treat it as is, and they don't reveal the can thing, it's actually it's got enjoyable moments because while I don't like some of the aesthetics of the show, for example, or the show of the Kelvin verse movies, the ships I don't like for the most part. You've got
Yeah.
the Enterprise that this is J.J. Abrams' words himself. He wanted to give it a hot rod vibe. I'm sorry, mate. It's the bloody Enterprise. It's not your sports car, mate. What are you doing? Like you try to make
Well,
it, but it's much bigger than the original Enterprise, and it
first of
completely
all,
throws Canning out.
first of all, if he was gonna make an original or make it more original, he didn't really travel too far away from the original design. But what he did do with design,
Bulk up and beef it up.
especially really messed it up because it looks like the nacelles are pumped full of air, and all of a sudden you have these fat nacelles, and I'm like, this is just looks horrible.
Hot
What
rods
are
with
they doing?
the fins on the back as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, yeah,
What
exactly.
are
I'm
you
sitting
doing,
going,
man?
ugh.
And the phasers of it as well. I mean, I think this comes from the original series a little bit.
Mhm.
Oh no, does it actually? The whole I like a phaser beam to be a beam and not like
Right.
the start of the pulse phaser which we get
Yeah.
on the Defiant. So you're getting this little. It's more Star Wars the phasers on the and they're little turrets rather than strips. I hated that. It just looked.
Yeah. I know. Yeah.
It's like, but saying
Everybody
that,
loved to see the phaser coming like right out of one point or whatever.
yeah, it
And the
was more
yeah,
practical,
and
wasn't
the
it?
phasers. I got to give credit to when they did Star Trek: The Next Generation. Then they had the phasers that were basically on a traveling rack around around the saucer section.
Yeah,
So essentially, it can follow around the rim
the
and
strip
shoot in any direction. That was a nice little touch. And ever since then, all the starships, beyond that point, all do
kept it.
that.
Had the original Enterprise ever had the
No,
Kelvin verse? No,
not
it didn't. It didn't. So
no. Mm-mm.
that's why even Star Trek Enterprise, the series, once they got their phase cannons, was a bloody beam.
Mhm.
Just leave it like it wasn't on the strip because they just started off. But and
To be honest with you, I believe the reason why the original series didn't fire from other areas around the saucer was the usual reason. Back
oh, of
then, it would have
course,
cost too much.
yeah.
So they had it firing from one area all the time, like a forward view of it just going bzz,
Which we can let them
because
off for, you know.
oh, yeah, yeah.
So while we didn't like that, I can't remember what it was called. It was the you've seen pictures of this, Gray, but because you haven't seen it, the one of the admirals in it, the guy, what's his name that played RoboCop? He was in it.
Oh, Peter Weller?
Yeah, he was in it. Who I love as an actor. He's very
Yeah,
good at
yeah,
certain roles, and he was good in this standalone. For he was good performance. He's the bad guy that's chasing after Kirk in a bloody Black Ops ship that is a dreadnought, which is huge. Again, if you step away from Star Trek, you look at this thing and go, wow. I mean, I love starships. This thing was a beast. This is like if Starfleet was proper military, this is what they would have. Massive nacelles. It was faster. It was black to generally blend in more. It was more armored, more power, everything. It was like a blown up Defiant, essentially. But
right,
again, because it's Star Trek, because we don't believe in that, Starfleet's not about that, I didn't like that. Defiant was an exception later on because we knew why that came about. And as you
right.
see here, she's my baby. And that's my second favourite ship over there, but that's for another episode. But you've seen this ship, haven't you, Gray? The Dreadnought that the Admiral
Well,
was in. What did you
the
think?
the Dreadnought actually goes back a long way because I think even after, uh, TOS ended, they were already talking about that there's a Dreadnought in the service because they have to have some kind of a battleship or whatever.
Yeah,
And if I remember right, I thought the original Dreadnought design looked somewhat like the Enterprise, but it had 4 nacelles, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom.
uh-huh.
Um, and it was sleeker, and it was always, known to have more armaments on it and, thicker
Yeah,
armor, but the Dreadnought has concept or whatever, I think has changed somewhat over the years. But essentially, it's a tougher armor-plated, you know,
yeah,
faster, more weapons, blah, 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 just like you would think a battleship should have.
yeah,
I mean, then in Star Trek, again, this goes back to cost again. They never really talked about uh, whatchamacallit, fighter ships or escort ships or attack ships that come out of a larger ship, which is normal, like on aircraft carriers and stuff, right? The
yeah,
jets come out. You only started seeing that in, I think it was Discovery season 2, out of the Enterprise, Pike's
yeah.
Enterprise, where you did see the fighters come out, whether they be manned or robotic, because it makes sense.
And the Enterprise
And
E is supposed to have that as well, but you never see it.
right. Right. And technically in canon, the original series Enterprise could do that too, but again, you never saw that, and that was because of cost, etc.
Okay.
So when the Defiant came out, it made sense because you had the Dominion War. They needed to have something because, like it or not, there's a war going on. So when
No,
the
but
Borg started coming around,
where
when
it
the
came from,
Dominion came
Gray,
around,
it was a Borg thing, wasn't it? So
Right. They started changing their ways when the Borg was discovered, and they
And
started
that's why I
changing their
like that idea. It's acceptable.
right. It makes sense, right? And when the Dominion War came around, they also said, "Oh, now we got this going on. We
Yeah.
have to have something."
Did
So it made more sense.
Did you like that Dreadnought? And did you must have seen pictures or sections of it from Star Trek
Yeah,
Into Darkness.
sure.
So did you like it? Or are you like me, like standalone on its own? It looked impressive, but there is no need for it in Star Trek, except like this
Yeah.
timing period.
No, you're right. I wouldn't have. I would only expect to see a ship like that if again it was Dominion War or Borg thing or something like that.
Yeah,
You're gonna bring these things out. The
yeah.
the other thing that I always thought was a little, well, again, it could have been cost, right? A little odd was in Deep Space Nine they had the Defiant, but you never saw more than one Defiant most of the time. It
They
would
only
just
made
seem to
one.
be exactly, and I'm like, if you really want to nitpick, that's a little unrealistic. You're gonna build one ship like that, and that's all you need.
Well,
I don't.
it's a bit silly because Chief Miles O'Brien manages to work out all the kinks and the problems conveniently that the Defiant has. So let's make more of them, and they did. They did make more of them. They made a couple more
Sure.
after, like the Sao Paulo when the Defiant was blown up, and renamed it Defiant, which I thought was a nice, classy touch. But then again, this is going to be, we're talking about our Starships episode. This will be a lively one because there's things about that Defiant that I like and dislike and how they approached it. It was in First Contact, and then conveniently there was no mention of it in DS9 afterwards. Little nitpicks like that all the way through.
Yeah.
But essentially, is it safe to say, Gray, that we don't mind remakes and new old ideas being used again if they do a brilliant job on it? They have to do a really good job in it. And out of a score of 3 there, for the positive, it's actually 2-1 up, in my opinion. The first 2 examples were good. The last one was a bad example. There are probably more examples out there, but we were just covering 3 of them. What's your thoughts on that, Gray?
Do you remember the Deep Space Nine episode where they went back in time? I forget how that they did that, and they visited the Enterprise during the Tribbles.
I love that, and they done that so
That was
well.
good. That was really
But that
good.
wasn't a remake. That was just,
No,
yeah, it was not a remake,
it
but
was
they're
what
going back.
they were on the outskirts
Time
looking in
travel.
as to what was happening. So everything still happened the way it happened, but now on the peripheral were the members of Deep Space Nine,
See,
and how they were reacting.
putting that together was genius. See the guys that put that together, the way they cut that, the way they wrote it. Wow,
Yeah.
that wouldn't have been easy. To have them
No,
it looked like they were
no.
interacting with Kirk and Spock and
Yeah.
Bones, but they weren't. But it looked like they were.
They went back a lot of times if when they have the original negatives, they went back to the original negatives of the film so that they could bring it back looking good. Not like the remaster now that all look good, but then it wasn't really a remastered episode. They actually developed a whole from the negative a whole new reel of film.
Oh
And
wow,
then they digitized it and then they did their magic or whatever.
that wouldn't have been cheap. I love that. That
Yeah.
that was brilliant. It isn't a remake, but it is going back in time. It's a time travel episode. It's using
Mhm.
an old concept. Tribbles are in it again. They done that well. So there is evidence of Star Trek of them doing it well, but there is
Mhm.
also evidence of them not doing it well. And more often than not, it tends to come from Kelvinverse movies or the new series that have got out, like Discovery, who've just made an arse of it. Not always, but sometimes they have. And then it ripples through to future episodes and seasons and series, great, like the Time Crystal. You have to use these things because they happened. One of the first episodes of Strange New Worlds was, or it might have been the very first one or two, where Pike's on the planet and he has to reveal the Enterprise to them because this whole planet had saw the fallout of season 2 of Discovery, the explosions and
Right.
stuff, and antimatter explosions in space, and they started reverse engineering the technology. So their hands are tied behind their back, but they make a good job of it. So I'd like to
Sure.
say to Star Trek writers, please think very carefully when you make these stories and these plot lines, because your future writers and creators may hate you for a long time and have to clean up your mess.
Yeah.
um,
Plus you want to see more originality. It's okay once in
yes,
a blue moon, but stick with the originality and so forth.
And don't
I
do
mean,
time travel for a long time, please.
right. And speaking of revisiting, people have different opinions of how they, well, if you want to call it a revisit of the Gorn,
I love that.
because
Yes. Revisit.
technically, if depending how strict you want to be, the Gorn was never seen until Kirk saw them
Yeah.
in that episode. But they've stretched this a little bit now with Pike
Oh,
because
within Breaking Point.
well,
They
the
stretched that a
thing that I
lot, mate.
like, the thing that I did like about it is okay, I can accept the fact that you know about the Gorn, but you haven't seen him, and that there could be a survivor of the Gorn, like I forgot the character's name, and they never really saw them. They just heard
The
the
Soong
clicking.
lady. I can't remember her
Yeah,
first name. Yeah.
yeah. And so she heard the clicking and the noises that they make. And why do they have to have clicking for every alien? That's another thing. Um, so okay, that's cool. I can accept that. But then they started stretching it by showing younger Gorn
Mm.
or juvenile Gorn or baby Gorns. So technically, they're going to say, okay, so no one's ever seen the adult Gorn. I don't know, man. And they're talking about bringing the Gorn in some more in the second season, and I'm just going like, the more and more you do that, not saying that it's not a good episode. There were some they were good episodes, okay. But the more and more you do that, the more you're just basically saying that Kirk wasn't the first one to see it, and yet he was in canon. So
How many times has
a
canon been
rough one.
stretched in Star Trek, man? Too many
Yeah, but this
times.
is right. But this is really stretching it
Oh
more and
yeah,
more.
within Breaking Point.
Eventually,
Yeah,
that rubber band's going to break, and you're just going to go, "Wow, okay,
going to be a
we'll
mess.
pretend that." Yeah. Then
Yeah.
they got to sit there and figure out, well, how do we write an episode where Kirk wasn't the one that first saw it? I mean, it's going to start getting rough.
If they not shown us what they actually look like, or maybe they showed us what they look like, but the only people that saw them were the people that actually died. So really isn't an
Right.
account of them.
Which they were kind of doing at first, because they showed like the people from the planet she was on that she escaped
Yeah.
alive, and so they did show them kind of like, and you would see little things in the shadows, and they would get eaten up and killed and all that, and that was all good. So I'm going like, oh, that's a good way not to see the Gorn,
Yeah.
you know.
I have to
But
agree
when
with
you
you there.
did start seeing them, even if they were juveniles, okay, wow, man, I don't know how are they going to write the episodes in the second season involve the Gorn again if you can't see what it's just,
It's
I don't know.
kind of
I don't know what to
disappointing.
make of it.
It's kind of disappointing if we end up seeing the Gorn again. You should have just done it that one time and then let it be, because it just about worked to no more. So please do not rip the arse out of it. Leave it be, and we move on.
By the way, what they should have done as an Easter egg is when they were talking about the Gorn in Pike's Ready Room. In the background, they should have had the head of the Gorn they used in the TOS episode on the shelf.
Oh, instead of the one that they did, yeah. No, let's not do that.
That would have been hilarious if you saw that.
That's the equivalent of
Like, what?
taking, these mascots that you get at sports games. That's the equivalent of
Yeah.
taking one of their hats off of their helmets and just sticking there.
Exactly.
That's how bad it was. Don't get me started on that, Gray. I don't blame them. I don't blame them, but it was god awful.
Well, it looked good from the neck down. I mean, I was convinced.
Yeah, it was a mascot in there for sure. So, I mean, basically, I think summing up, Gray, we'll wrap up there. That remakes, to answer Tony's question there, kinda indirectly, remakes can be done well in Star Trek. Often we're proven there's many examples, but we've also proven once or twice where it's been just shit. And that is purely on the new generation of writers that weren't doing a great job of Star Trek writing or canon. So please think very carefully about what you're doing writing-wise, because we're a bit of a stickler for canon in Star Trek. But no, we thank Tony for that question. What we'll do is we'll wrap up here, great, and then we'll come back for a review on Thursday or Friday of the next episode of Lower Decks and see how we got on. So I thank you, Mr. Gray, for your time, and say goodbye to the people, and we will catch you next time. See you later, guys.
Long and prosper.
Bye-bye.